I'm Dan Drake. This is Front Up, and with us today is one of the candidates for the Nantucket Land Bank Commission, the Nantucket Islands Land Bank Commission, technically. Bruce Perry. Bruce, welcome.
Good morning.
Delighted to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Kind of.
Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the land bank.
Sure.
You've been on the island for a long, long time.
I've been on the island for 28 years.
Mm-hmm.
Came here in the summer in the 60s. My wife says I should mention that I'm a descendant of Tristram Coffin, 17 generations ago, I think. So we've been here for a while.
Actually, I am too.
Are you?
No, I don't know if I'm just, but that same range.
Yeah. So
Hi, cuz.
yeah, right. So I've been there for 28 years. Worked for the Conservation Commission before. Then I worked for the Land Bank. I got elected to the Land Bank in 92 and 97, and then resigned from the Land Bank to work for them back in 97, and then I stopped working with them last November.
And you've raised a family here, and
Yes.
all that good stuff.
A son and a daughter.
Yeah,
Yes.
great. So why do you want back in?
Well, I've been with Land Bank for over 20 years, and now that I've stopped working for them, I just thought I would stay in and be part of the process.
What are there particular things that you'd like to see the land bank accomplish that either it hasn't accomplished or needs to go off in another direction to do?
I don't know if there's another direction. I think that the Land Bank's accomplished a lot in the 25 years that it's been around. I think that it's done wonderful things for the island and for the public by buying over 2,500 acres of land and having open space and public access. I think it needs to be a little bit more closer to its conservation mission. I think that it's strayed a little bit from that, and I'd like to see it get back to it.
By acquiring more land, by better conservation of what it owns, what specifically do you mean?
I think the Land Bank should acquire all the land you can, because that's the only way you can guarantee that it's going to be available for public use into the future. Targeted acquisitions on the harbors, of course, and the ponds, because there's always a need to get to those before they're built up around it.
That's not really conservation, is it? I mean,
it is and it isn't.
Public access versus conservation?
It is, because the public access is less intrusive on the environment than a large house and landscaping and all the things that come with it. The inputs that a development would do on all our ponds is much more damaging than a limited amount of public access. So, and of course, in the long term, development doesn't pay for itself, so we'll save the taxpayers money, because open space doesn't
pay for itself either.
It doesn't cost the town anything either.
Well, it does, because there's no taxes being paid on the land.
There's no taxes being paid, but it's not asking for schools or police or fire or anything like that, so it has no expense.
What about the other side of it, the sort of social impact side of it, in terms of the effect on the housing market and so forth? That it clearly, in a place where the amount of land is finite,
yes,
the more land that is sort of taken out of circulation, the more prices are going to go up. If capitalism holds true, the more prices are going to go up, and housing is going to become more of an issue, and particularly affordable housing. Right.
That's what, again, the Land Bank's targeted acquisition is for open space away from the areas that are zoned for higher density development. So as long as you don't buy down the density, then it'll be available. And I think we're digressing from the Land Bank's mission a little bit.
No, well, we are and we aren't, because I think one of the questions I've always had is, should the Land Bank should its mission be changed at this point, not to take, so it doesn't keep taking land out of circulation?
Well, one of the things that makes Nantucket special is all the protected open space, and the Land Bank's been part of that. I think if the Land Bank wasn't there, or we changed the Land Bank to use the funds for something else, then you get the threat of changing the island into being just any other place that people can go to, and there's plenty of easier places to get to, which is one of the beauties of Nantucket, because it's hard to get here. And it's special because there is all this open space. So I think if you allow increasing development into the open spaces, then you get a chance of losing the reason why people get here.
You made a comment a couple of minutes ago about the fact that having the land bank acquire land is the only way that assures it will stay in the public domain, if you will,
Correct.
forever. What did you mean by that?
Well, as we've seen over the years, families have had open tracts of land, and the one generation dies off, the next generation gets a hold of it, and eventually, at some point, the land is open for development.
Mm-hmm.
And through conservation restrictions, you can keep some of the development away, but there's no necessarily guaranteed for public access to the property. Okay, so the only real way to do it is to buy it. You can regulate it to a certain amount through zoning or through wetland regulations, but only the way to ensure it is to own it.
But there are a lot of other organizations that own land and are acquiring land
Yes.
as well, and hopefully they're not competing against each other for this open space.
No. Well, over the years, Land Banks works with all the other organizations, so we're not sitting there bidding against each other on the same piece of land. And the directors of the various groups talk all the time about what they're looking at, and so there isn't that competition. So, for example,
go ahead.
The Sconset golf course, Skinner's. The Land Bank worked with the Sconset Trust to buy half of it, and the Sconset Trust bought the other half. For the Land Bank to buy it all would have been too much for our coffers to afford, and so by working with the Sconset Trust, we were able to get the whole piece.
And as a side note, the clubhouse out there is being redone.
Yes,
right?
it is. Yeah.
What's going to happen with the clubhouse at Maya Comet?
Well, that's an interesting thing. I think that the Land Bank Commissioner is looking at the moment. I think some things has to be done. It needs to be upgraded. It certainly was patched together back in the 60s, and the Land Bank's been polishing that sneaker for a number of years. So I think there are some plans to redo it some way. There's some bigger plans, some smaller plans. My concern was that we need to figure out who's going to pay for it, and how it's going to be paid for.
And how would you want to see it paid for?
Again, I think a big expansion should be paid for by the users, and Land Bank paying us some portion of it. Again, Land Bank had spent over $20 million out at Maya Comet Golf Course over the last 10 years or 15 years. So at some point,
Does Maya Comet make money, lose money?
That's a two-headed sword. I think operations make money, but the Land Bank subsidizes it to about $400,000 a year in paying off the notes and the debt to acquire it and to expand it. Remember, we did went from 9 to 18 holes.
So the Land Bank is paying the debt service, but on
Yes.
an operational basis,
Yes,
it's not a drain.
It's not a drain. Well, it is a drain if you include it as a commercial entity that should pay for itself. Then it is a drain and being subsidized about $400,000 a year. But the operations do cover their own
But if
costs.
the Land Bank had bought the land and left it as it was, or let it return to nature,
Right.
they would have had the same issue, right?
They would have the same issue,
They
but
would have been paying the debt service.
right. They would have been paying the debt service, but it would be different. Something different would be out there. It'd either be open space or it would be passive recreation or something that doesn't have all the things associated with the golf course. I think the golf course is great out there. I mean, a lot of people enjoy it, and the Land Bank does own the only two public courses on the island. So,
What are there specific things that you would like to see the Land Bank doing that it's not doing now, in terms of being more aggressive about open space acquisition, in terms of doing a better job and I'm not suggesting it does a bad job, but doing a better job of maintaining its properties or something totally different. What is sort of your agenda?
well, don't necessarily have an agenda other than I just want to stay involved with the Land Bank. So, from being more aggressive in open space, you can't buy it unless it's up for sale. So behind the scenes, Land Bank has been working with a lot of people to talk to them and make sure that they call us first before the realtors if certain parcels come up for sale. So that's being done behind the scenes. Property management, the Land Bank has a great reputation of maintaining its property for public use, and it gets a lot of public use. The beaches, at 40 Pole is, as you know, is packed every day in the summer, and they spend a lot of time keeping all our properties clean. So that should stay. That shouldn't change. So it's not really a big change agenda other than need to be
the field station, the UMass field station,
Yes.
and now the Boy Scout camp,
Yes.
have both been the subject of a lot of discussion because the conservation restriction that was on the property ran out, and I guess that's statutory in Massachusetts unless you take some extra step.
Right. There's two different kinds of conservation. There's a deed restriction, which runs for 30 years and then expires, and there's a conservation restriction, which goes in perpetuity, and you have to go through the legislature to get it. You start locally, signed off by the selectmen, and it goes up to the state.
So the deed restrictions on those two properties expired after 30 years,
Right.
And the owners, not getting the debate about who owns the Boy Scout camp,
Yeah, exactly.
but the owner, in the case of UMass, and somebody, at least, who thinks they're an owner
Right.
of the Boy Scout camp, want to sell it.
Right.
And basically, and how, I mean, the community, through, I guess, primarily the Conservation Foundation, stepped up to the plate on the UMass field station.
Right.
I don't know what's going to happen yet. I don't know if anybody does with the Boy Scout camp.
Yeah.
But are there other properties like that that are out there that you are aware of that are in danger of?
There's a couple with the acquisition of Norwood Farm Trust last year by the Foundation and Land Bank that plugged one large hole in our large holding. There's a couple other large parcels out there that are privately owned that the Land Bank is talking to them about.
No, but I'm talking about these deed restrictions where it's either in the hand. You don't know.
I don't know, because usually if it's 30 years ago, that was all done and the people have forgotten about it.
But wouldn't it be worthwhile perhaps reviewing some of those parcels that are owned by not-for-profits other than the land,
to see what's out there,
to see what's out there and sort of try to preempt them if
possible.
If possible.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There has been some discussion, Bruce, that your parting from the land bank as an employee wasn't entirely amicable. Do you think that has any potential impact on your ability to work with the rest of the commission and with the staff going forward?
I think we're all adults and professionals, and there were some issues and didn't work out, and so I resigned. But I think going forward, we're going forward.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to have the viewers know about your involvement with the land bank, or what else you'd like to see happen there?
I think they need to work a little bit more on their compliance with state and local permits. They need to catch up on some things, and I like this, since I am knowledgeable on all those issues, it can help out there.
Another question just occurred to me.
Yeah.
In my involvement with the airport, we obviously have issues of natural heritage issues,
Yes.
environmental issues.
Yes.
And if we do something that impacts one of these areas,
Yep.
whether it is environmentally sensitive, we have to mitigate it
Sure.
by setting aside other. One of the things that's come up has been the possibility of setting up a land bank, quote unquote.
A different kind of land bank.
A different kind of land bank, island-wide,
Right.
to use for this mitigation. Does that make sense to you?
This
think
came
it's
up.
feasible?
It is feasible. It came up a couple years ago. The state came down and talked with, I think, the DPW and the selectmen and the land bank about how to set this up. It's helpful if the town has some project that's looking at the future. It's going to need some land and disturb it and habitat, that they have some land set aside for the mitigation. It is a good idea. It's part of the problem. It's hard to get municipalities to look into the future far enough ahead, because it's not inexpensive to buy 50 acres of land to set aside to something you're going to need, maybe need in 15 years.
But could the private organizations or a public organization like the land bank play a role in that too?
I think it'd be difficult by statute. The land bank statute doesn't allow us to dispose of our land. So whether we can use land bank land for mitigation for a town project, that's kind of difficult. See, the land bank acquired the land for the ball fields in Obadier, and when the idea came up to use them for the town's ball fields, we went to the state to do mitigation. We got a lesser credit from the state because the land was already protected. So they said, well, we're not giving up as much as a private developer would. So it is possible to use land bank land for mitigation, but the ratio is 4-to-1 versus 2-to-1 for the town. So every acre you disturb, and it's land bank land for mitigation is
3-to-1 for the airport.
and 3-to-1 for the airport. So because it already has a certain level of protection on it. So
Bruce Perry, candidate for the Nantucket Land Bank Commission. Best of luck to you.